Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. So on a lark, I wanted to play a game on Steam, and that game was Cinders, which is a visual novel retelling of the Cinderella story by Moa Cube. And I kind of knew the second I started it that this updating of the Cinderella story was probably at least informed by feminist theory's critique of the Cinderella story as problematic and patriarchal. But I actually was very much enjoying myself while playing Cinders. I felt like they weren't trying to demean or tear down the original Cinderella story. It felt like they were doing a loving retelling of the fairy tale. And then I went to read Moa Cube's website description of the Cinders game, and their description of their story is much more irritating to me than the execution of the story itself. The execution of the story itself seemed to have a nice balance to it. But their description of the story is of the original Cinderella fairy tale is very passive aggressive and very dismissive. And the point I want to make in this video is, like I've said before, you can never live consistently with the progressive intersectional theory of storytelling. Someone's always going to be able to find a problematic element to your game. And I do see a problematic element to Moa Cube Cinders game, which they probably didn't think of as problematic in 2012. But in current year, their portrayal of a black woman with tattoos on her, who's kind of a witch or voodoo-inspired magical character, well, that's incredibly problematic. So that makes it all the more fun to see these woke reviews of Cinders from the Mary Sue. Cinders is not a cut and dry morality tale, but rather a story about a woman trying hard to make a better life for herself. So let it be known that iconic feminist pop culture blog, the Mary Sue, celebrates and endorses and recommends a game that features racist, colonial cultural appropriation of voodoo culture for the sake of their westernized story. Kotaku praises it. Indie Games. I don't know much about Indie Games, but I know that Kotaku, I heard that name coming up a lot back in 2014. GG, you know what I mean? So there's no way to live consistently. You know, Moa Cube tries to make a Cinderella a more strong, independent female character in line with the feminist critique of the Cinderella story. And even they will naturally do things in telling their version of the story that are problematic if you look for it, and even much more problematic than the Cinderella story. Racial cultural appropriation, man, that's way higher on the progressive stack than just the treatment of Cinderella in the original story. So I have a point to this video, and I'm going to be defending a controversial thesis. Well, maybe not controversial, depending on your perspective, but the original Cinderella character is a better, strong female role model character than Rey from Star Wars or all the girl characters from Ghostbusters. The original Cinderella character kicks butt, and she actually is a good role model for your daughter. She actually will instill good ideas in your daughter. And the only way that Cinderella could encourage your daughter to be this sort of tepid and timid little flower who waits for a prince to come save her is if you're a stupid parent and you don't have conversations with your child about these things. So I'm going to use Moa Cube as kind of my illustration of the average Joe's view on the Cinderella story. So they talk about stories and themes of Cinders. They talk about taking inspiration from some of the darker, more violent versions of the Cinderella story in folklore. They wanted theirs to be less sugar-coated, but still have, they didn't just want it to be dark and gritty, they just wanted to have player choice in their version. Okay, I appreciated that aspect. Writes Moa Cube, we're treating the fairy tale as a framework to tell our own story. It gives us a setting, some base plot points, and characters. Of all the fairy tales, we pick Cinderella because we honestly don't like it. The protagonist is very passive, and the message seems to be a good girl and learn to take abuse quietly. Then maybe you'll find a rich husband. We want our Cinders to be a clever, attractive woman who makes her own choices. You missed a article adjective there. Even if she goes for the fairy tale ending, it should be her decision. We're using various methods to reinforce this theme. So I think the creators of the Cinders game have fundamentally misunderstood what the original Cinderella fairy story is about. Now, when I say that, the problem is which version of the Cinderella fairy story. There's the Disney version, there's the Grimm version, which is I think, really help popularize these stories. And then there are also kind of critical editions which gather multiple versions of this story from different countries around the world. So that I can't read like 20 or 30 versions of the Cinderella story. So I just encourage you, if you are a writer or an artist, to start reading some of these old folkloric tales, because they kick butt. And they're odd stories. That's what I love about them, is they don't follow the conventions of the Hollywood formula because they pre-exist the Hollywood formula. And there's obviously a pro-con aspect to that. When Disney updates the story, they make the plot a little bit more focused. They cut, some of the fat off, and they make a good movie. But in the process of doing that, they change the story quite significantly. And the old stories have this very bizarre charm to them, very inventive charm to them, in spite of things like plot holes. So I think to be in the proper mindset to enjoy folklore and fairy stories, you have to put aside the kind of mindset which looks at a movie and says, oh, that wouldn't make sense, that's not in continuity, oh, that contradicts that. You have to look at them as what they were intended to be, stories for young children growing up, mostly with the didactic purpose. They're supposed to teach good lessons to young children, to instill good morals in them. So you might... one problem I have with the feminist critique of Cinderella is it seems so ridiculous. Why are we spending all this time debating a little children's story? Couldn't we debate something more substantive? And then you might say to me, well, why are you talking about the Cinderella story? Because the academic feminist critique of the Cinderella story is noticing that it's didactic, it's noticing that it's teaching a moral lesson, and it's critiquing the moral idea that Cinderella is trying to teach. So when we're debating the merits of the Cinderella story, we're really debating the merits of the moral that story is trying to teach. But if you haven't read any of the old versions of the Cinderella story, you can't have an informed conversation about that. And I'm sure that the academic feminists who created this theory decades ago did read the Cinderella story and have those old folkloric tales in mind. But let's be honest, for every one academic feminist who reads the story, there are probably several thousand young people who barely read. They watch Netflix all day, and they hate Cinderella just because they have this general vibe that it's sexist or something. And that, you can't read everything. There's not enough time in life to read every book and every critical theory on every fairy story. It's just a very natural thing to do, that we just sort of take in by osmosis ideas that people have around us. Christians do this, cultural Christianity. It's not that you believe, it's just everyone you know goes to church, so whatever, I'll go to church. I think a lot of feminists, it's not that they are radically committed to feminist theory or devour feminist books all day. They just kind of take in by osmosis some of the ideas and arguments of feminism because it just seems like the thing to do. It seems, yeah, that makes sense. And then they don't have to go read, 500 pages of feminist theory to figure out what is actually being said. So, like I said, it's normal and understandable if you don't try to become an expert in everything, including feminist theory. But what I would suggest to you is, before you go out and start talking about things being sexist or racist or homophobic or transphobic, before you use language like that to accuse storytellers or cultures or even people in the past, in our history, I think you have an obligation to double check what the heck you're talking about before you introduce language like that into the conversation. If you're going to say Cinderella is sexist, then I expect you to have read more than just a Disney-fied version of the Cinderella story. So with that, I'm going to take a look at two versions. These aren't the oldest versions of the Cinderella story, but I picked what I thought might be two good popular versions of the story, influential versions that probably influenced English readers, and of course the Grimm editions, which influenced a lot of German readers. And let's just read it, and I'll make my point as we go. So first, I'm looking at Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm's version, published in one of their later editions. So this is one of their revised versions of their Cinderella story. A rich man's wife became sick, and when she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, remain pious and good, and then our dear God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." With this, she closed her eyes and died. There we go. We could end the video right here, one sentence in, and I've already identified what the feminist problem would be with the original Cinderella folkloric story. This is a Christian story. What is Cinderella's mother's final advice to her? To trust in God, to be pious, meaning religiously pious in her devotion to God, and a good person, and then trust in God for protection, okay? In the absence of the Christian worldview, the Cinderella story isn't good for much anymore. This is a explicitly German Christian fairy tale. Stop culture, you're appropriating my culture, you guys. Okay, anyway. The girl went out to her mother's grave every day and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread, a white cloth over the grave, and when the spring sun had removed it again, the man took himself another wife. The wife brought 2 stepdaughters into the house with her. They were beautiful, with fair faces, but evil and dark hearts. Time soon grew very bad for the poor stepchild. "Why should that stupid goose sit in the parlor with us?" they said. "If she wants to eat bread, then she will have to earn it. Out with this kitchen maid." They took her beautiful clothes away from her, dressed her in an old gray smock, and gave her wooden shoes. "Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is," they shouted and laughed as they led her into the kitchen. There she had to do hard work from morning until evening. Get up before daybreak, carry water, make the fires, cook and wash. Besides this, the sisters did everything imaginable to hurt her. They made fun of her, scattered peas and lentils into the ashes for her, so that she had to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked herself weary, there was no bed for her. Instead, she had to sleep by the hearth in the ashes, and because she always looked dusty and dirty, they called her Cinderella. So let me make a point. So we're already starting to see the themes that the feminist or contemporary critique of Cinderella would be. The argument is, oh, well, she's passive, she's submissive, she doesn't, she has no independence. And the point I'm trying to make is you need to be in the proper you have to have the proper mindset to understand what the heck this story is trying to be. This is not a Pixar movie script. This is not a Disney movie. This is not a contemporary Hollywood version of the Cinderella story. This is a folklore that would be probably spoken aloud by parents or grandparents or uncles and aunts to children, maybe in the home around the fire while eating dinner. So there would be a conversational aspect to this. Kids would be asking questions, and the adults would have to answer those questions. So I want you to kind of like transport yourself back in time, and you have like mom or dad telling you this story in old-time Germany, and you get to ask those questions about, well, why did Cinderella do this? Why did Cinderella do that? Because if you ask those questions, then the natural response from the parent is to try to explain the story or try to make application to real life. So why isn't Cinderella being a badass and knocking down doors and judo slamming her stepmother to the ground? Because she's in a toxic situation where she does not have much power. You know, if she physically attacked her stepmother, she could go to jail. She could be executed for murder. And you notice that Disney killed off the father. But one of the big things about the Cinderella story is, where is the father in all of this? And in the Grimm version, it's not really touched on that much. But in almost every version where the father is left alive, we get the distinct impression that the father has a significant portion of the blame for not intervening into Cinderella's situation. He's a failure as a father, and his failure is causing this grief for Cinderella. This is what's created the difficult circumstances she's enduring. Her mother dies. Her mother gives her, in the very first sentence, the thing we need to carry with us as a reminder throughout this: remain pious and good, and then our dear God will always protect you. You don't have that first sentence, you don't have a Cinderella story that makes sense. So Cinderella sleeps by the fire, and they call her Cinderella. One day it happened that the father was going to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said the one. "Pearls and jewels," said the other. "And you, Cinderella?" he said. "What do you want?" "Father, break off for me the first twig that brushes against your hat on the way home." What? What does this even mean? So that was my first reaction when I read this. And this is a motif you see in tons of these old stories. The selfish girls ask for pretty jewels and pretty dresses, and the good girl asks for something like a flower or a twig, something of no monetary value. Why is she doing that? Is it just because she's such a goody little two-shoes? It's because this is, again, a religious metaphor. What do her wicked sisters want? They want material wealth. They want status. They want the things of this world, prestige, physical beauty. They've been described as beautiful on the inside, but with wicked hearts. What does Cinderella want? Well, it's a very bizarre request, but my read on this is she's asking for something of no value that would have sentimental value to her because it'd be a gift from her father, and because later we see she's planning to plant a tree with it. I don't think that makes quite scientific sense to stick a twig in the ground and then it becomes a tree, but Cinderella has asked for something which is practical and sentimental. She wants to plant a tree for her mother at the grave, and and she wants to tend for that tree. So she's asked for something that will give her joy, as opposed to fine jewels and fine dresses that will only make her pretty on the outside. Okay, when you have a story that is about not letting what is on the outside define you, but trying to be beautiful on the inside. You've heard that motif over and over and over again in your stories. Well, then you are adopting ideas from the Cinderella story. You cannot escape the Cinderella story when you write anything, including a more mature novel or a more mature comic or movie. You cannot escape the themes, even in this little simple children's story. So the father breaks off the twig and he brings it home to Cinderella, and she plants it, and it grows and becomes a beautiful tree. Now, Disney's version, there's a million clickbait articles about the differences between the Disney version and the old versions of this, and you're going to start noticing the differences cropping up more and more from this point on. So she waters this tree. She weeps and prays. She weeps and prays by the tree. There's the religious theme coming again. A white bird came to the tree every time, and whenever she expressed a wish, the bird would throw down to her what she had wished for. Okay, so you see in Disney movies, the princess is surrounded by beautiful wildlife. Well, in the context of the Christian German folklore, this is interesting. Why is a white bird coming? Because she's being pious. To who? To God. What is the white bird in the biblical story? It's the Holy Spirit, the dove. So the reason animals dance around Disney princesses is because they're drawing from German folklore, where ideas are images of the white bird, images of animal life and piousness are being drawn directly from the Bible, and then the German folk are mixing those up into their little fairy story, and then that translates from the German fairy tale into your Disney movie. In the Cinderella story, there is a Christian image being evoked here for how Cinderella is being blessed. Now, it happened that the king proclaimed a festival that was to last 3 days. All the beautiful young girls in the land were invited so that his son could select a bride for himself. When the two stepsisters heard that they had been invited, they were in high spirits. They called Cinderella, saying, "Comb our hair for us, brush our shoes, and fasten our buckles. We're going to the festival at the king's castle." Cinderella obeyed, but wept, because she too would have liked to go to the dance with them. She begged her stepmother to allow her to go. "You, Cinderella," she said, "all covered with dust and dirt, you want to go to the festival? You have neither clothes nor shoes, and yet you want to dance." So it's of note here that the abuse that Cinderella faces is emotional abuse. She faces insults. She's not being dangled by her heels from the ceiling and subjected to medieval torture devices. She has to endure nasty comments from her stepmother and her stepsisters, okay? And if what you have to endure is nasty comments, then toughen up, Buttercup, because if you can't take some nasty comments, then the bully is only going to want to bully you more. Bullies like it when you react negatively or whine at them when you receive verbal abuse. Zach talks about childless weirdos a lot. I feel like this is something anyone who's had children has had multiple children, or even just a bunch of siblings, they've been able to figure this out. If someone teases you, you do not reward the bully for teasing you. If you get online and whine about the bullies are coming after me, you have rewarded the bully for picking on you. They're laughing at you. So what is Cinderella teaching little girls? To be passive and submissive and just take it and don't push back at all. It's teaching little girls to endure verbal insults without, kicking the crap out of your sisters, because that's not going to do any good to Cinderella's situation here. By enduring it and not spitting back at them, Cinderella is doing a smart thing. She's not giving her sisters fuel to add to their nasty fire. That's a weird metaphor. But anyway, because Cinderella kept asking, the stepmother finally said, I have scattered a bowl of lentils into the ashes for you. If you can pick them out again in 2 hours, then you may go with us. So it's of note that Cinderella's cruel stepmother is deliberately giving her busy work that means nothing. She's making a mess and then telling Cinderella to clean it up as an excuse for denying Cinderella what she wants to do. And I'm going to skip over some of this because even though the fairy tale is public domain, and I will link it below, the translation of it might not be public domain. I think it's copyrighted by the translator, and I don't want to get a copyright strike. So she says a rhyme and calls for the pigeons and turtle doves to come help her. Hey, what bird represents the Holy Spirit? The dove, you say? Well, how about that? Once again, animal life, specifically doves, like the Holy Spirit, are coming to physically aid Cinderella. So the birds come in and they separate the good ones into the pot and the bad ones into the crop, almost like Jesus's parables, where the good grain is being separated from the bad weeds of the garden. That motif shows up over and over again in Jesus' parables, and it's showing up here as a little detail in the grim Cinderella story. And then the stepmother sees that, and so then she does it again. This time she throws 2 bowls of lentils into the ashes and says, okay, pick them all out in 1 hour and you can go. And the wicked stepmother thinks Cinderella will never be able to do this. Cinderella does the same thing. She says the same rhyme. In comes the pigeons. And there's a nice rhythm to these stories too. So it's not just like they, give you the cold hard facts. They've got it's rhythm. There's a ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-da-da-da-dump to how they use words, which is probably lost somewhat in the English, but you can still pick it up even if you're only an English speaker. So what do the pigeons do? They nodded their heads and began to pick, 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 and the others also began to pick, 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 pick. Right? It's a nice use of repeating words to kind of get you into the flow of the story. So Cinderella, after doing everything her stepmother has asked, is still denied. Her stepmother said, it's no use. You're not coming with us, for you have no clothes and you don't know how to dance. We would be ashamed of you. With this, she turned her back on Cinderella and hurried away with her 2 proud stepdaughters. So Cinderella goes to her little hazel tree that she has planted as a memento to her dead mother, who reminded her to be pious and trust in God. And Cinderella cries out, quake and quiver, little tree, throw gold and silver down to me. Then the bird, the white bird, which is visually distinctly reminiscent of the Holy Spirit, threw a gold and silver dress down to her, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She quickly put on the dress and went to the festival. Her stepsisters and her stepmother did not recognize her. They thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in the golden dress. They never once thought it was Cinderella, for they thought that she was sitting at home in the dirt, looking for lentils in the ashes. The prince approached her, took her by hand, and danced with her. Furthermore, he would dance with no one else. He never let go of her hand, and whenever anyone else came and asked her to dance, he would say, she is my dance partner. Now, one noteworthy thing about the folklore is it follows the rule of 3. In the Disney movie, she shows up to the dance once, she runs away before the clock strikes midnight, and that's the big scene which leads up to the what would that be? That would be kind of like the disaster before the climax where he finds her and gives her the glass slipper in the Disney version. In the folklore, she goes to the ball 3 times, and every time it's a little bit different. And this is where what I said about these folklores just being completely different types of stories comes in. If you're looking at this from the perspective of, oh, this is like a movie plot, then you could say, oh, this is a plot hole. How come he doesn't recognize her? How come she keeps going to the same ball over and over again? But don't look at it through that lens. Look at it through the lens of, this is an interesting story that mom and dad are telling you by the fire. And suddenly this makes sense. They are giving you kind of interesting variations on this theme of Cinderella going to the ball. And some of these little details I'm going to mention because these are the great, juicy little details. This is what makes Cinderella more kick-ass than Ray has ever been or ever could be. You ready, feminists? Cinderella is a badass action girl. Let's see what she does. So, after she danced until evening, and then she wanted to go home. But the prince said, I will go along and escort you, for he wanted to see to whom the beautiful girl belonged. Triggering. However, she eluded him and jumped into the pigeon coop. The prince waited until her father came, and then he told him that the unknown girl had jumped into the pigeon coop. The old man thought, could it be Cinderella? I love this. The prince is taking Cinderella home, and to evade the prince, she flees into a pigeon coop. Like that specifically, that's great. What? And he can't get her. He can't go in and get her. She's like completely eluded him. He had them bring an axe and pick so that he could break the pigeon coop apart, but no one was inside. She's vanished. She's like Cinderella from the originals, like a ninja girl, guys. She's disappeared into the aether. And the story doesn't tell this. Is this like a religious thing, like the magic dove is helping her, or if she's just that good at subterfuge. Oh my gosh. So Cinderella's gone, dudes. And then they come home to see Cinderella lying in the ashes. So like I said, if you're thinking about this, looking for plot holes, why did Cinderella do this? This is kind of weird. It's kind of funny. That's my point. This is a funny, silly thing for Cinderella to do, where you could call it a plot hole. I look at this as a joke. She's done something that's completely hilarious. And I guess the only reason that could possibly make sense is she doesn't want to be discovered. She doesn't want her stepmother and stepsisters knowing that she has snuck her way over to the ball. And the bird has taken away her beautiful dress again. So, like I said, this is the rule of three. So she goes to she says another prayer at the tree again. The bird brings her a more magnificent dress. The prince dances with her and says, "She is my dance partner." And let's call attention to this detail, because here Cinderella's badassery continues. She's way more of a strong female role model than poor Ray ever could be. When have you ever seen Ray do something as badass as this? When evening came, she wanted to leave, and the prince followed her, wanting to see into which house she went. But she ran away from him into the garden behind the house. A beautiful tall tree stood there, on which hung the most magnificent pears. She climbed as nimbly as a squirrel into the branches, and the prince did not know where she had gone. He waited until her father came, and then said to him, "The unknown girl has eluded me, and I believe she has climbed up the pear tree." The father thought, could it be Cinderella? He had an axe brought to him and cut down the tree, but no one was in it. She's in a giant ball gown and she's climbing a tree. Sherman Cinderella had like German ninja training or something. This is great. She's gone again. She's eluded her captors. She's not letting no man escort her. Cinderella's completely boss. Oh my gosh. And then she goes back and hides in the ashes. So, yeah. You know what I said earlier? Like, why is Cinderella running away from the prince? It's a little weird. And that's kind of the thing that might have started conversations back in the good old days when you were reading these stories aloud or just reciting them from memory to your kids. The kids would say, why did Cinderella run away, Mom and Dad? And then Mom and Dad would have to tell you their idea for why Cinderella ran away. And maybe their version of the story would be a bit different. But Cinderella is very good at evading capture, and she's very good at hiding on her own what it is she's doing. So my point is, if you walk into the Cinderella story thinking Cinderella's terrible and it teaches girls to be passive and submissive and not do anything, then you're going to see it. But if you come in thinking Cinderella is boss, I see Cinderella doing lots of boss stuff. She is making decisions. She has agency. She's deciding to go to the ball in defiance of her stepmother, and she individually is doing amazing stuff to evade capture. She's so awesome. On the third day, when her parents and sister had gone away, Cinderella went again to her mother's grave and said to the tree, "Shake and quiver, little tree, throw gold and silver down to me." And like before, the bird brings her the most magnificent dress yet, because everything's got to build when you use the rule of threes. It was a magnificent dress the first time. It was a more magnificent dress the second time. It's the most magnificent dress ever the third time. And when evening came, Cinderella wanted to leave, and the prince tried to escort her, but she ran away from him so quickly that he could not follow. The prince, however, had set a trap. He had the entire stairway smeared with pitch. When she ran down the stairs, her left slipper stuck in the pitch. The prince picked it up. It was small and dainty, and of pure gold. This is a riot. The prince has noticed. So this only works when you use the rule of three. This couldn't work in the Disney version. So the prince has noticed that she's run away from him twice now. So our prince is thinking. He's noticed a pattern, and he has made preparations. He has prepared a trap for the girl who he wants to be his dance partner. He is a go-getter. So he's laid a trap for her, and which is kind of interesting on the princess's part because he's canny. And then she has escaped the trap, leaving her shoe behind. So it's not that she's just a klutz and the shoe fell off her. She got the shoe off her foot and she made her escape, and she's running barefoot home because Cinderella is totally boss, and she's like a heroic action girl. Like, the only thing this needs to be the perfect boy story is for her to fight a few ninjas along the way, and then Cinderella would be every little boy's favorite character too. She is so cool. The next morning, he went with it to the man and said to him, "No one shall be my wife except for the one whose foot fits in this golden shoe." So now's a good chance to talk about the prince. Why does he like Cinderella? And the kids might ask that. Why did the prince dance with Cinderella? Was it because she was beautiful? Is it because of her dress? Well, let's think about that. Cinderella's stepsisters are said to be beautiful. Why isn't, if he's just being purely superficial, why isn't he dancing with them? Is he dancing with Cinderella just because she has that dress? Well, maybe, but that doesn't seem to... You don't dance with a girl all night and exclusively if you like her dress. The implication we have is that the prince likes something in particular about Cinderella, and because Cinderella's stepsisters have beautiful faces, that begs the question of what is it in particular about Cinderella that has attracted the prince's attention, that has not attracted his attention to the wicked stepsisters? And the implication would be it's because Cinderella is a good person. That is what makes Cinderella different from her two wicked stepsisters. And most notably, the prince goes for Cinderella and he doesn't go for the stepsisters. So why is that? Well, the fairy tale doesn't tell us exactly why. But if you're having a conversation with your kids and they ask that question, the answer I would give to my kid is that because the prince looks at Cinderella and he can tell she's a good person by the way she acts and the way she conducts herself. She is such a good person that she walks into the room and everything about her tells you that she's a good person, not just her looks. Her actions tell you that. That has to be what the prince is observing. He's spending whole nights dancing with her. He has had an opportunity to get to know Cinderella over the course of 3 nights and observe her character. He is a good judge of character. And the character of Cinderella is what rescues her from her bad situation. Because, like her mother said, we cannot miss this. Dear child, remain pious and good, and then our dear God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you. The reason that Cinderella is rescued from her bad circumstances is she has, for the entirety of the story, not just been a badass girl who gets away from stuff and can evade capture from the prince's soldiers, but she is a good person. She is a heroic character. And then that was kind of maybe the best chance I had to make my point about the morality of this story. You kind of know the rest from there. He has to identify the girl he wants to marry with the tree. And, you've probably seen the BuzzFeed articles talking about the violent moments from Grimm's fairy tales. So, trigger warning, here come the violent moments. He comes to the kitchen. Oh, I got off track. There we go. Okay, so the stepsisters, one of them cuts off her big toe, and one of them cuts off a slice of their heel so that they can try to fit their foot into the shoe. And for some reason, the prince doesn't recognize them. So, like I said, these versions of the stories are a little bit silly. Like, why doesn't he look at the face of the stepsister and know that's not the girl he danced with? Well, because her foot fits. That's the answer. All right, don't overthink it. And then as he's driving home with each of the stepsisters in turn, the pigeons come out and they sing, "Rook-de-goo, rook-de-goo, there's a blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. The bride is not right." For some reason, my pigeon turned into Mario. But the pigeons, the doves, the birds who have been her companions and Cinderella's helpers because they're a religious metaphor, are also identifying the wicked stepsisters as charlatans. They're lying to the prince. They're pretending to be someone they're not. They're injuring themselves to try to accomplish this. But they are being called out. Their lies are being discovered. And then after both sisters harm themselves, mutilate their feet, then there's only one girl left in the house. "That is not the right one either," he said. "Do you have another daughter?" "No," said the man. "There is only a deformed little Cinderella from my first wife, but she cannot possibly be the bride." Oh, the father is so horrible in this story. Failure of masculinity, failure of virtue, failure of manhood and fatherhood. And look at the trouble he has caused. That's another part of this story, is that the father's an idiot, and he keeps missing that Cinderella is there because he's a doofus. The prince told him to send to send her to him. But the mother answered, "Oh no, she is much too dirty. She cannot be seen." But the prince insisted on it, and they had to call Cinderella. She first washed her hands and face clean, and then went down and bowed before the prince, who gave her the golden shoe. She sat down on a stool, pulled her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it into the slipper, and it fitted perfectly. When she stood up, the prince looked into her face, and he recognized the beautiful girl who had danced with him. He cried out, "She is my true bride." The stepsisters and the two sisters were horrified and turned pale with anger. The prince, however, took Cinderella onto his horse and rode away with her. As they passed by the hazel tree, the two white pigeons cried out, "Rook-de-goo, rook-de-goo, no blood's in the shoe's not too tight, the bride is right." After they had cried this out, they both flew down and lit on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right, the other on the left, and remained sitting there. When the wedding with the prince was to be held, the two false sisters came, wanting to gain favor with Cinderella and to share her good fortune. When the bridal couple walked into the church, the older sister walked on the right side and the younger sister on the left side, and the pigeons pecked out one eye from each of them. Afterwards, as they came out of the church, the older one was on the left side, the younger one on the right side, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye from each of them. And thus for their wickedness and falsehood, they were punished with blindness as long as they lived. German folkloric tales love justice, brutal justice. This is great. So my point is, not only it's not just, everyone talks about, like the violent details of the old Grimm fairy stories, but they served a purpose. The purpose is that at the end of the story, awesome, totally wicked justice slams down on the wicked stepsisters, and Cinderella is vindicated. Her goodness is rewarded. There is hope at the end of the bad tunnel. And as I hope I've pointed out by some of the details of this story, Cinderella is not a meek little doofus waiting around for Prince Charming to come to her. She is very active in what happens to her. She makes the humble request for the tree, which she plants as a memento to her mother. She prays to God because she's trying to become a more pious Christian girl. She relies upon God to rescue her from a bad situation. Her bad situation is emotional insults, but it's not physical abuse. So it's not like she needs to go to the police and report that her sisters are, dangling her from her hair from the ceiling or something. And then when she defies her mother by going to the ball and impresses the prince with her goodness, bucks his desire to take her home and eludes him spectacularly. Her evasion and hiding are like Solid Snake level awesome subterfuge and espionage tactics. She is just a total ninja girl back in this old German version. And then after her stepsisters destroy themselves with their wicked behavior, Cinderella is recognized as the good person, the true bride the prince has been looking for, and her wicked stepsisters face justice from the birds who have been Cinderella's protectors. So the same divine providence that has been helping Cinderella, rescuing Cinderella after she endured her hard circumstances, there's also divine retribution to the two sisters for their sins, right? This is a Christian folkloric tale. You can't strip that out of it and get what it means without that context. Yeah, okay, that made my point. There was a second version, but I think I made my point successfully. It's The Cinder Maid, adapted by Joseph Jacobs in the early 1900s, and I think what's notable about this is a popular version published in English, so who knows, maybe this was a version which informed the Disney writers. What's noteworthy about Jacobs' version is that he tries to answer some of the plot hole questions, like what's wrong with the father, and in Jacob's version, it becomes clear that the father is henpecked, and as Cinderella is rescued, the father also has to stand up for himself and not take a bunch of guff from his wife. He has to stand up for Cinderella. So that theme is more clearly expressed in Jacob's version. They call her Cinder Maid rather than Cinderella. There's some they use honey instead of tar. I don't know. It's really interesting to just compare and contrast these versions of the stories and see what got fleshed out, see what got left out. It doesn't have quite as much of the explicit Christianity as I think the Grimm version did, but it is true to the same pattern as the Grimm fairy tale, and it also leaves out some of the gory details. But wonderful. I love the Cinderella story, and the critique of the Cinderella story is more than just a argument about a children's story. It's an argument about the morals that children's story instills in young people. And here's the thing. If Cinderella was the only story you ever taught your child, it is entirely possible that they could misinterpret the meaning of Cinderella and think that the meaning of the Cinderella story is they're supposed to wait around and then Prince Charming will swoop in on a white horse and rescue them without them having to do anything. And my point here today is that that is a misinterpretation of the original Cinderella story. The original Cinderella story has Cinderella making choices and kicking butt and being awesome. And it has a Christian context where you need to have that Christian context to understand it. Cinderella doesn't work as an atheist story. It works as a Christian story. And the point, the Christian moral of it is to endure suffering and be a good person and trust in God. In Cinderella's case, she finds a nice husband and lives happily ever after, but you're not necessarily promised that in real life by the Bible. You might endure a long life of suffering and toxic abuse and stuff. This is what Jordan B. Peterson is catching on to, even though he's not an Orthodox Christian in sort of the traditional sense of the term. He's reading the Bible, he's talking about the themes of the Bible kind of from his perspective as a psychologist, and then he's making moral points based on that. And that's resonating with a lot of people because they see in Jordan Peterson's discussions of the Bible and in fairy tales and popular myth, they see a morality that is missing from the contemporary left and the postmodern left and the intersectional feminist deconstruction of everything that we love. I love the Cinderella story, and it is impossible for you to write a story that resonates with people without the ideas of goodness in a folklore like this. So I semi-enjoyed the Cinder's game. I think they are trying to tell a good story in their own right. Of course, it's problematic because of that, because every good story is always going to be found problematic by some nutball with an agenda. But I think it's just sad that they have so missed the mark of what the original Cinderella story is and what it's trying to be. And I hope that in the future we can see more comic books, more video games, more movies and animated series which tap into this grand, moral, beautiful idea from these older tales. We shouldn't think that we're the smartest people in the history of the planet. We should pay attention to the stories and ideas of people in the past because what they have to say, even in their fiction, is of value to us today. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later. Oh, if you like this vid, why don't you like, comment, and subscribe? And remember, always include triggering stuff. It's the only way. It's the only way. She prays to the tree